Liam Knight, a successful millionaire CEO, is out for dinner with his new girlfriend, Emma. But when he spots his ex-wife, Olivia, working as a waitress and visibly pregnant, everything changes. Past mistakes, guilt, and unresolved feelings resurface, leading Liam to question if he can ever make things right. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories like this one. Now, let's begin the journey. Liam Knight, the CEO of a cutting-edge technology company, was at the pinnacle of success. At 35, he had everything a man could desire: wealth, power, and a beautiful new girlfriend, Emma. They were seated at a corner table in one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city, the soft hum of murmured conversations surrounding them. Emma, a successful lawyer in her own right, was effortlessly charming as always, her smile lighting up the room, her laugh infectious. Liam, though appreciative of her presence, couldn't help but feel the weight of a memory creeping into his thoughts. It had been years since the divorce, but the scars were still there, hidden just beneath the surface. He had once shared this very space with Olivia, his ex-wife. The same table, the same laughter, the same warmth that had dissolved over time into bitterness. The memories were not pleasant, but neither were they forgotten. As Liam looked out the restaurant window, lost in thought, a familiar face caught his eye. Olivia. There she was, unmistakable even after all this time, standing behind the hostess desk, a black apron tied around her waist. She wasn't there for dinner, though. She was a waitress now. Liam's stomach dropped. He had heard rumors about Olivia's financial troubles, but seeing her in this role was a shock. She was no longer the polished, confident woman he had once known. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal, and there was a wariness in her eyes that spoke volumes. But it wasn't just that. It was the unmistakable curve of her belly. Olivia was pregnant. His pulse quickened as emotions he had long buried began to surface. The last time he had seen her, it had been during their ugly divorce proceedings, when every word exchanged had been sharp and hurtful. He remembered the last fight they had before it all fell apart, and the words she had said, words that had cut deep. But seeing her now, pregnant, in a restaurant where they had once celebrated their love, a place that had been theirs, made him feel an unexpected surge of guilt. Olivia's eyes met his for the briefest moment. There was no shock, no surprise on her face. She simply held his gaze for a second, then looked away, her posture tense as she continued serving another table. That fleeting moment felt like an eternity to Liam. His heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to get up, to walk over to her, to say something, anything. But he was frozen, unsure of what to say or do. Emma, noticing the shift in Liam's demeanor, raised an eyebrow. "Liam? Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft but insistent. Liam snapped back to the present, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just lost in thought for a second." Emma, however, wasn't convinced. She glanced over her shoulder, following Liam's line of sight. Her eyes narrowed as she saw Olivia, her face a mask of curiosity. "Is that your ex-wife?" she asked. Liam's heart sank. He had hoped Emma wouldn't recognize her. His mind raced. The last thing he wanted was to explain the story of his failed marriage and the fallout that followed. "Yes," he said, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed him. "It's been a long time." Emma's gaze shifted back to Liam, studying him closely. "Are you okay?" she asked again, her tone more serious now. There was concern in her voice, but Liam couldn't bring himself to share the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "Yeah, I'm fine," he replied quickly, offering a forced smile. "Let's just enjoy dinner." But even as the words left his mouth, he couldn't focus. His mind kept circling back to Olivia. The image of her, pregnant, working here to make ends meet, gnawed at him. How had things gotten so bad for her? And why was she so determined to do it all on her own? His chest tightened with regret. The rest of the meal passed in a blur, the conversation with Emma barely registering as Liam's thoughts were consumed by Olivia. He tried to shake it off, but every time he closed his eyes, her face appeared, tired yet resolute. His ex-wife, the woman he had once promised to love and cherish, was now carrying his child alone. That night, as Liam lay in bed, sleep eluding him, he couldn't help but replay the evening over and over in his mind. His gaze shifted to the empty space beside him. Emma had already fallen asleep, her breathing steady and calm, but Liam was wide awake. He kept seeing Olivia's pregnant figure, the way she had avoided his eyes, The way she had looked so determined, so independent. A sense of guilt washed over him, mixing with a deep, unspoken longing. His thoughts spiraled out of control. What had gone wrong? How had things turned out this way? He had left Olivia, thinking the grass would be greener, but now all he felt was confusion and remorse. Would she ever let him back into her life? Would he ever have a chance to fix the mistakes he'd made? Unable to sleep, Liam sat up in bed, his mind racing. He needed answers. He couldn't let this go. The emotions, the guilt, the regret, they all screamed inside him, demanding to be acknowledged. And so, Liam Knight, the man who had built an empire from the ground up, found himself lying awake at night, haunted by the image of his ex-wife, pregnant and alone. The following days were a blur for Liam. The image of Olivia, pregnant and working as a waitress, refused to leave his mind. No matter how hard he tried to focus on the business meetings, the board discussions, or the growing responsibilities at his company, his thoughts kept drifting back to her. It was as if he had been transported back to a time when everything was simpler, before the weight of their broken marriage had tainted everything. He spent the entire day at the office, his mind far from the stock reports and product launches in front of him. He couldn't concentrate on anything. His hand moved over his desk, tapping idly as his mind raced. The sight of Olivia, working in a restaurant for the first time in years, felt like a slap in the face. How had she ended up in this situation? What had happened to her? Why didn't she ask for help? And why, after all this time, did it still matter so much to him? By mid-afternoon, Liam had had enough. He couldn't stand being trapped inside his thoughts any longer. He grabbed his phone, dialing the number of Nathan, his best friend and trusted lawyer, a man who had always been there for him through thick and thin. Nathan picked up on the third ring, his voice heavy with the familiarity of their friendship. "Liam, everything all right? I need you to find out about Olivia," Liam said, his voice sharp. "I need to know what's going on with her. Everything." Nathan paused. "What happened? You just saw her, didn't you? Is this about the restaurant?" Liam let out a frustrated breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Yeah, I saw her at the restaurant. She's pregnant, Nathan. She's working there as a waitress. I can't stop thinking about it. What happened to her? What's going on in her life?" There was silence on the other end of the line for a few moments. Nathan knew that Liam had always been a man who kept his emotions buried deep beneath layers of control. For Liam to open up about Olivia like this, it wasn't something that happened often. "I'll look into it," Nathan finally said, his voice soft. "But you know, man, you can't just fix everything from the past by throwing money at it." Liam's jaw clenched. "I'm not trying to buy her back, Nathan. I need to understand what happened. Why did she leave? Why is she doing this alone?" Nathan hesitated before replying, "I'll get back to you as soon as I have something." Liam ended the call, his chest tight. He leaned back in his chair, looking out the window of his office. It was a perfect day, the city sprawling beneath him, a symbol of everything he had achieved. And yet, in the midst of all that success, there was something missing, something he could never replace. He had always been proud of his accomplishments, but now, the weight of his past was bearing down on him like never before. That night, he sat in the silence of his apartment, the glow of city lights filtering through the curtains. Emma had gone out with friends, giving him space to think. He couldn't help but wonder if she had noticed the shift in him over the last few days. If she had seen him retreat into himself, consumed by thoughts of Olivia. He hadn't been able to explain it to her, not in any way that made sense. He didn't know how to. At the same time, Liam couldn't deny that a part of him wished Emma would ask, would question him more deeply. But the truth was, the last thing he wanted was for her to dig too far into his past. He had built a new life, one without Olivia, one that he had convinced himself was better. Yet now he was faced with the reality that he was nowhere near the man he had hoped to be. The next morning, as Liam walked into the office, a familiar voice greeted him. It was Rachel, Olivia's best friend, the one person who had been with her through thick and thin, through all the ups and downs of their tumultuous marriage. Rachel had always been sharp, perceptive. She saw through Liam's mask of confidence and knew better than anyone the depth of his regrets. "Morning, Liam," Rachel said casually, her eyes scanning the room, her smile warm but knowing. She had always been a little too perceptive for his liking. But today, her gaze felt heavier than usual. "Rachel," Liam said, trying to sound casual, though his heart was racing. "What brings you by?" She leaned against his office doorframe, her arms crossed over her chest. "I need to talk to you," she said bluntly. "About Olivia." Liam's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced, and for a moment, he wasn't sure what he was expecting to hear. "What about her?" Rachel's expression hardened slightly, though she seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "I know you've been thinking about her," she said softly, "and I know why. But you need to understand something. Olivia is in a different place now. She's not the woman you left behind." Liam stiffened. "I know that, Rachel. I'm not trying to change her. I just want to know what happened. Why is she working in that restaurant? Why didn't she let me help her?" Rachel shook her head slowly. "She didn't want your help, Liam. Not in the way you're offering it. You can't just throw money at her problems and expect everything to be okay. She's been through a lot that you don't even know about." Liam felt a pang of guilt at her words. He had always assumed that Olivia would be okay, that she would just figure things out, that everything would work out on its own. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He had left her to pick up the pieces of their broken life. "She's pregnant, Rachel," Liam said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw her, and it's not just about the money. I need to know what's going on. I need to know if I've messed things up so badly that there's no way back." Rachel's eyes softened, and for a moment there was a flicker of empathy in her gaze. "You've hurt her, Liam," she said gently. "You've hurt her more than you can imagine. But she's strong. She'll be fine. Just don't think that showing up and throwing money at her problems is going to make everything go away." Before Liam could respond, Rachel turned to leave, but she paused at the door. "Just remember this. Olivia is doing this on her own, and she's doing it because she has to. If you want to be a part of it, you'll need to prove it to her. Not with money, but with time, with action. She needs to see that you're really ready to change." Liam stood there, the weight of Rachel's words settling heavily on his shoulders. He was no longer the man who had walked away from Olivia, but he wasn't sure who he was now either. He had so many questions, so many regrets. But one thing was clear. If he wanted to have a chance to be a part of Olivia and their child's life, he would have to prove he was truly a changed man. And so, the next step of his journey began. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions for Liam. Each morning, he woke with a sense of determination, a need to fix things with Olivia. But each night, as the city lights flickered beyond his windows, the weight of guilt pressed down on him harder than ever. He was a man who had built an empire with ruthless precision, who had negotiated countless deals and crushed every obstacle in his path. Yet, when it came to the one woman who had mattered most, he had failed her. And now, with the news of her pregnancy, he realized just how profoundly he had failed. Liam found himself obsessively replaying the past, the bitter memories of their marriage, the fights, the cold silences that had followed. He had been so focused on his career, so determined to succeed, that he hadn't even noticed when Olivia began to slip away from him. The signs had been there, clear as day. But he hadn't seen them. He hadn't seen her distress, her growing unhappiness, until it was too late, until it was all over. The memories of their divorce flooded his mind like a tidal wave. Olivia, her face pale and hollow as she signed the papers, her eyes devoid of the warmth that once radiated from them. His pride had led him to believe he could have it all, the career, the money, the power, and that Olivia would somehow understand. But that wasn't how life worked, not for her, and not for him. And now, here he was, standing on the edge of something much bigger than he had ever bargained for. He had left her once, thinking it was the right decision, but now, all he saw was the woman he had once loved, struggling in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. Olivia, pregnant, alone, carrying the child that should have been his responsibility. His heart twisted at the thought of it. How had he allowed things to fall so far apart? The guilt gnawed at him throughout the day. He avoided Emma's calls, unable to face her. She had been patient with him, understanding of his moments of silence, but there was a growing tension between them that he couldn't ignore. She could sense it. Emma had always been astute, able to read people as if they were open books. And now she could see that Liam was pulling away from her. He didn't know how to explain to her that it wasn't about her, that it was about something deeper, something unresolved. By the time the evening rolled around, Liam found himself sitting at a quiet corner table in a cafe, staring at the half-finished cup of coffee in front of him. His phone buzzed again. A message from Emma. "Liam, we need to talk. Please answer me." His fingers hovered over the screen, but he couldn't bring himself to reply. Instead, he stood up, leaving a few bills on the table, and walked out into the cool evening air. The city stretched out before him, bustling and alive, but all he could feel was the weight of his past. At home, Emma was waiting. She stood in the doorway of their apartment, arms crossed, her face a mixture of concern and frustration. She had been patient with him, but now something had shifted. She wasn't going to let him avoid the inevitable conversation any longer. "Liam," she began, her voice soft but firm. "What's going on with you? You've been distant for days. You've barely even looked at me. And I know it's not just work. I know it's something else. You're pulling away." Liam couldn't meet her gaze. His thoughts were consumed with Olivia, her pregnancy, the way she had looked at him that night, the way she had seemed so determined to keep him out of her life. He wasn't sure what to say, what to do. He had been avoiding confronting the truth, but now, with Emma standing there, her eyes searching his face, he realized he couldn't keep running from it. "Emma, He hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "I saw Olivia the other night. She's pregnant." Emma's expression softened, but there was a flicker of something else. Hurt, maybe? And? Liam took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "I don't know. I don't know what to do, Emma. She's carrying my child, and she's doing it all alone. I left her. I walked away, and now she's..." He faltered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's doing everything on her own. I don't know how I let that happen." Emma's face fell, a mixture of understanding and pain in her eyes. "You were never honest with me about this, Liam. I can't just ignore what you're feeling, but I can't pretend this doesn't hurt either." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You need to figure this out, Liam. You need to decide what you really want, because right now, I don't think you even know." Liam felt a pang of regret. Emma was right. He had been avoiding the truth, and now it was too late. He had to confront the reality of what he had done and the person he had become. He had spent so many years building his life, his empire, thinking that if he achieved enough success, everything else would fall into place. But it hadn't. His career, his money, none of it mattered now. All he could think about was Olivia and the child he had helped create. He looked at Emma, her face a mixture of sadness and determination. "I'll figure it out," he said quietly. "I have to." Emma didn't reply right away. She just stood there, her arms uncrossed, her posture more relaxed now, but her expression was unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "I hope you do, Liam," she said softly. "But I need to know that you're doing this for the right reasons, not just because you feel guilty." Liam felt the weight of her words, and for the first time in a long time, he realized just how much Emma had been there for him. She had stood by him, even when he had been too focused on his own world to see the cracks forming in their relationship. He owed it to her, and to himself, to figure out what kind of man he wanted to be. The next morning, he made a decision. He would go to Olivia. He would confront the past, face the guilt, and try for once to make things right. But as he sat in his office preparing to leave for the day, he found himself paralyzed with doubt. What if she didn't want to see him? What if she had already moved on? He couldn't answer those questions, but one thing was certain. He had to try. And so, as the day stretched on, Liam Knight found himself at the crossroads of his past and future, unsure of what lay ahead, but determined to make amends. For Olivia, for the child they were bringing into the world, and for himself. As he walked toward the door of the restaurant where he had first seen her, his heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face the consequences of his choices. Liam stood outside the restaurant, staring at the familiar sign above the door. The neon lights flickered against the dimming sky, casting an eerie glow over the small eatery. He hadn't been here in years, not since the bitter arguments that had marked the end of his marriage. The place was as unchanged as his memories, but he felt like a stranger here. He had no idea what he was about to face, no idea how Olivia would react to his presence. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. He had seen the uncertainty in Olivia's eyes that night, the firm way she had dismissed him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was too late, that the woman he had once known, the woman he had loved, had moved on from the wreckage he had left behind. Yet something deep within him kept urging him to try. Maybe he could make things right. Maybe he could find a way to show her that he had changed. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The low hum of conversation filled the air, along with the faint clinking of glasses and the sizzling of food from the kitchen. The restaurant had a warm, rustic feel, with wooden tables and soft, golden lighting. Olivia was nowhere in sight, and for a moment, Liam wondered if he had made a mistake by coming here. Maybe she wasn't working tonight. Maybe he should turn around, walk out, and forget all about this. But then, as if fate itself had drawn him in, he saw her. Olivia was standing behind the counter, wiping down a tray. Her movements were slow, deliberate, her pregnant belly rounding beneath her apron. She looked tired, worn out, but there was a determination in her posture, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. For a moment, Liam simply watched her, his heart heavy with a mixture of admiration and guilt. When she noticed him, her expression faltered for just a moment. Her eyes narrowed, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Then, as if the sight of him triggered something deep inside her, she straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "What are you doing here?" Olivia asked, her voice flat, guarded. Liam swallowed, his mouth dry. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice hoarse. Can we go somewhere and talk?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she just looked at him, as though measuring him, trying to decide if he was worthy of her time. Her gaze was filled with a mix of wariness and something deeper, something that hinted at the hurt she had carried for so long. After a long pause, she sighed, shaking her head. "I don't have time for this, Liam," she said quietly, her voice firm. "You don't get to just show up here after all these years and expect me to listen to you." Liam's heart sank. He knew she was right. He had no right to ask her for anything. He had abandoned her, left her to carry the weight of their failed marriage alone, and now he was standing here, hoping for a second chance. But something inside him refused to let go. He wasn't going to walk away this time. Not without trying. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you," he said, his voice trembling. "But please, just hear me out. I can't stop thinking about you, about everything we've been through. I need to understand what happened, why we ended up here. I can't fix it all, Olivia, but I want to try. I want to be there for you, for our child." Olivia's eyes flickered with surprise, but she quickly masked it with a sharp, cold expression. "It's too late for that, Liam," she said, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of pain. "You made your choices, and now I'm the one who has to live with them. I don't need your pity. I don't need your money or your help. I'm fine on my own." Her words stung, cutting through him like a knife. Liam could feel the rawness in her voice, the walls she had built around herself to protect against the pain he had caused her. He knew that it wasn't just about the money or the help. It was about everything he had taken from her, everything he had broken when he left. "I don't want to fix everything with money, Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not asking you to let me back into your life. I'm asking for a chance. Just a chance to show you that I've changed, that I'm not the man I was when I left." Olivia looked at him, her eyes narrowing, studying him closely. The silence between them stretched on, heavy and tense. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "You don't get it, do you?" she asked, shaking her head slowly. "You don't get how much damage you did, how much you hurt me. You were never there for me, Liam. Not when I needed you the most. You were always so wrapped up in your career, in your own world, and when things got tough, when I needed you by my side, you walked away." Liam's heart clenched in his chest. He had never truly understood the depth of the hurt he had caused her, not until now. The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the gut, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the full force of his failures. "I know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I know I hurt you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I did, for everything I didn't do. I wasn't there for you, and I'll never be able to make up for that. But I want to be there now. I want to be a part of our child's life. I don't expect you to forgive me. Not now, not ever. But I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. For you, for me, for our child. Olivia's expression softened, just a fraction, but the walls she had built remained intact. She looked away as if struggling with her emotions, her eyes filled with uncertainty. You can't just show up and expect everything to be okay, Liam, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I can let you back in. Liam nodded, understanding the depth of her doubt. I know. I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I'll prove it to you, Olivia. Every day, I'll show you that I'm serious, that I want to be the man you need me to be. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their past hanging in the air between them. Finally, Olivia spoke again, her voice quieter now, more resigned. I don't know what the future holds, Liam, she said, her gaze flicking to the door as if she was already thinking about the long night ahead. But I'll think about what you said. That's all I can promise. Liam felt a surge of emotion, relief, guilt, and hope all tangled together. He wasn't sure what this meant for them, or if there was even a chance for reconciliation, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had taken a step in the right direction. He had reached out. He had tried. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start over. I'll be here when you're ready, Liam said softly. Whenever you're ready to talk. Olivia gave him a small nod, her eyes flickering with something he couldn't quite read. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the dim light of the restaurant, feeling both lighter and heavier than he had in years. And as the door swung shut behind her, Liam knew that his journey was far from over. The road to redemption was long, and the obstacles ahead were immense. But for the first time in a long time, he had hope. He had the faintest glimmer of a second chance, and that was all he needed to keep moving forward. The weeks that followed were marked by an unsettling silence. Liam tried to keep himself busy, at work, in therapy, even with Emma, but his mind never strayed far from Olivia. Every conversation, every task, every quiet moment seemed to circle back to her, to the image of her pregnant and working, to the quiet strength he had seen in her eyes, and the subtle sadness that lingered even when she tried to mask it. His mind kept replaying that last interaction in the restaurant, her firm refusal to let him back into her life. And yet there was a hint of something, a flicker of emotion he couldn't quite decipher. Still, Olivia was distant. She didn't respond to his texts, didn't return his calls, and continued to keep him at arm's length. The small acts of kindness he had tried to extend, the baby supplies he had sent her anonymously, the simple notes of encouragement, went unanswered. It was as though he had become nothing more than a shadow in her life, a ghost she was determined to forget. At work, things weren't much better. Liam had always been laser-focused on his career, and now, with the added weight of his personal turmoil, he found it harder and harder to maintain his usual drive. His employees noticed, his business partners noticed. Everyone around him could see the change, but none dared to address it. They simply kept their distance, waiting for the storm to pass. But the storm wasn't passing, it was building. One afternoon, as Liam sat at his desk reviewing quarterly reports, he received a call from Nathan, his best friend and lawyer. Nathan's tone was urgent, his voice clipped. Liam, we need to talk. It's about Olivia. Liam felt a wave of panic rush over him, his heart pounding. What about her? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though he couldn't suppress the worry that crept into his words. She's not doing well, Nathan said, his words heavy with concern. Her pregnancy is taking a toll on her. She's been working long hours at that restaurant, and from what I've gathered, she's barely getting any rest. Her friend Rachel told me she's really struggling. She's exhausted, Liam, and you need to do something about it. Liam stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He hadn't heard this from anyone. What do you mean, struggling? Why hasn't she said anything to me? He asked, his voice rising. The guilt gnawed at him, the realization that he had let her suffer in silence, too focused on his own guilt to see what she needed. Nathan sighed. She's not going to ask for help. She's too proud for that. And you've got to stop thinking that you can fix everything with grand gestures or sending her gifts. She needs real support, Liam. She needs someone who's going to be there for her. Liam's mind raced. He had tried to offer help, hadn't he? He had sent the baby supplies, he had visited her apartment, and yet nothing seemed to reach her. She had rejected his overtures at every turn. Still, Nathan's words made sense. She wasn't going to let him back in easily. Not unless he proved himself. Not unless he showed up in a way that mattered. "I'll do whatever it takes," Liam said, determination creeping into his voice. "Tell me what I need to do." Nathan paused for a moment. "I'm going to give you Rachel's number. She's Olivia's closest friend. If you want to help, you need to start by talking to her. But remember, Olivia's pride is strong, and she doesn't want your pity. Whatever you do, don't make her feel like a charity case." Liam didn't need further instruction. He grabbed his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed Rachel's number. After what felt like an eternity, she finally answered. "Liam?" she asked, her voice cautious. "It's me," he said quickly. "I heard about Olivia. I didn't realize how much she was struggling. I need to do something. I can't just sit by and watch her work herself to the bone. What can I do?" Rachel's silence stretched on for a moment before she finally spoke. "Olivia doesn't want your help, Liam. She's stubborn, and she's proud. But she's also human. She's carrying your child, and she's going through so much alone. She needs rest, support, real support." Liam's chest tightened as he processed her words. "I know. I'm trying, Rachel. I'm trying to do the right thing here. I just don't know how to break through to her." Rachel sighed, the sound heavy. "The first thing you need to do is stop thinking that you can fix everything overnight. It's going to take time, and you need to prove to her that you're not just here for the baby. You're here for her. She needs to see that you're not going anywhere." Liam closed his eyes, feeling the weight of Rachel's words. He had been so focused on fixing things for the baby, on making amends, that he had failed to see the bigger picture. Olivia needed him, not just as a father, but as a man who was willing to stand by her side through everything. She needed him to be there, day in and day out, not as a savior, but as a partner. "I get it," Liam said, his voice firm. "I won't give up on her. I'll do whatever it takes to show her I'm serious." Rachel hesitated, then spoke again. "There's one more thing. Olivia's leaving her job soon. She's been pushing herself too hard, and the pregnancy is taking its toll. I think she's going to quit soon, but she won't ask you for help. If you want to be involved, you'll need to offer in a way that makes her feel like she's not losing control of her life." Liam's stomach dropped. "She's quitting?" The thought of Olivia giving up her job, her independence, struck him harder than he had expected. It wasn't just about the financial support. It was about her pride, her need to maintain control of her life despite everything. But if she was pushing herself to the limit, something had to give. "I'll take care of it," Liam said quietly, his resolve firming. "I'll make sure she doesn't have to worry about that anymore." When he hung up the phone, a sense of urgency settled over him. He couldn't wait for Olivia to come to him. He couldn't wait for her to realize he was serious. It was time to step up, to take control of the situation and show her that he wasn't the man who had abandoned her all those years ago. The next morning, Liam made the call. He reached out to Rachel, asking for Olivia's work schedule. When he learned that Olivia's last shift was that evening, he made plans to meet her after work. This time, he wasn't going to be passive. This time, he was going to take action. He would make her see that he was there for her, not just out of guilt or obligation, but because he truly wanted to help. Because, for the first time in a long time, he wanted to be the man she deserved. As the day passed, Liam's anticipation grew. He could already feel the weight of the decision on his shoulders. There was no turning back now. If he was going to show Olivia that he had changed, he would have to do more than just say the words. He would have to prove it. The evening air was cool and crisp as Liam drove toward the restaurant where Olivia worked. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of his resolve heavy on his shoulders. This wasn't just another attempt to reach out. This was his moment of truth. He had spent months agonizing over his mistakes, trying to be a better man, but this was where it would all culminate. If he failed tonight, there might be no coming back. But if he succeeded, if he could prove to Olivia that he wasn't just a man of empty promises anymore, then perhaps they could finally begin to heal. As he parked in the restaurant lot, Liam took a deep breath, steadying himself. His thoughts flashed to Olivia. Pregnant, exhausted, working herself into the ground. He couldn't just stand by any longer. The guilt had gnawed at him for too long, and now he had to act. not out of obligation, but out of the deep, undeniable desire to support her and be the father she deserved. The restaurant was bustling with activity as Liam walked through the door. The warm light and the clatter of dishes felt like a stark contrast to the cold unease in his stomach. He spotted Olivia immediately. She was moving through the crowd with grace, her eyes focused as she navigated between tables. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, and though she was doing her best to keep her composure, the strain on her face was evident. Her posture was slightly hunched, her movements more deliberate, and Liam could see that every step she took was weighed down by more than just the physical demands of her job. He had to get through to her. Liam approached the hostess, his voice steady. "I'd like to speak to Olivia, please." His tone was polite but firm, the urgency hidden behind the calm facade. The hostess, a young woman with an apprehensive glance, led him to a quiet corner where Olivia was wiping down a table. She didn't notice him at first, and for a moment, he simply watched her. She was no longer the vibrant woman he had married, the woman who laughed freely and whose eyes sparkled with hope. Now, there was a hardness to her, a wariness that she wore like armor. But beneath that armor, Liam could still see the woman he once loved, the woman who had made him feel alive in a way that no one else ever had. He couldn't let her push him away again. "Olivia," he said gently, his voice almost a whisper. She froze at the sound of his voice, her body stiffening as she slowly turned to face him. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, thick and heavy. Her eyes searched his face, reading him with a quiet intensity before her lips tightened into a thin line. "What are you doing here, Liam?" she asked, her voice low and guarded, but beneath it, he could hear the exhaustion. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was simply tired, both physically and emotionally. "I came to talk," he said, his gaze unwavering. He took a small step forward, but Olivia quickly held up her hand to stop him. "There's nothing to talk about," she said, the firmness in her voice unmistakable. "You made it clear where you stood when you walked away. You don't get to waltz back into my life just because you feel guilty." Liam flinched at the sharpness in her words, but he didn't retreat. "I'm not here because I feel guilty, Olivia. I'm here because I want to help. I want to be here for you and for our child. I know I've hurt you, and I can't undo that, but I'm asking you to let me try. Let me prove that I'm not the same man who left." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness. "Prove it? How? By sending me baby supplies? By showing up like this, acting like everything's going to be okay now? You don't get it, Liam. You don't get how much I've had to sacrifice, how much I've had to do alone. I don't need your pity, and I don't need your promises." Liam's chest tightened, and he could feel the weight of her words sinking deep into his heart. She was right, in a way. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't take back the years of neglect and the pain he had caused her. But what he could do, what he was determined to do, was show her that he wasn't the same man. "I don't want to pity you, Olivia," he said quietly. "I never did. What I want is to be part of your life, not as a savior, but as someone who genuinely cares. I can't change the past, but I want to help you now. I see how hard you're working, how much you're carrying on your own, and I can't sit back and watch you do it alone anymore." Her eyes softened for the briefest of moments, and for a second, Liam saw a crack in her armor. But just as quickly, it was gone. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to shield herself from the vulnerability his words had exposed. "I don't need your help, Liam," she said, her voice wavering for a split second before hardening again. "I've made it this far on my own, and I'm not going to let you come in and fix everything. I'm not that desperate." Liam's heart clenched at the pain in her words. He wanted to reach out, to tell her everything he had learned in therapy, everything he had come to understand about his own faults, about the way his pride had destroyed everything he once held dear. But he couldn't force it on her. She had to see it for herself. "I'm not here to fix anything, Olivia," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I'm here to stand beside you, to share this burden. You don't have to do it alone. And if you'll let me, I want to help you in any way I can, whether it's with the baby, with your job, or just by being here. I want to be part of your life. I want to prove to you that I'm serious." There was a long silence as Olivia stood there, looking at him, her face unreadable. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her response. He could see her fighting with herself, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now, but still tinged with caution. You don't know what you're asking, Liam. You don't know how much I've been through, how much it's going to take for me to trust you again. I know, Liam said softly, his voice full of regret. But I'm asking for a chance, a real chance. No more games, no more empty promises. Olivia's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she didn't look away. For the first time in a long while, Liam saw a glimmer of hope in her expression. She didn't speak for a long time, and when she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Okay, she said, but I'm not promising anything. I'm not ready to trust you yet, but I'll let you help, for the baby's sake. Liam felt his chest loosen, the weight of the world lifting just a little. It wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was a beginning, a fragile thread of connection, fragile but real. And for the first time in months, he felt like he had a chance. I won't let you down, Olivia, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. I'll prove to you that I'm not the man I used to be. As she nodded and walked away to finish her shift, Liam stood there, a sense of resolve settling deep within him. This was just the beginning. And no matter what it took, he was going to show Olivia that he was there to stay. For her, for their child, and for the future they could still have together. The days that followed were a blur for Liam. After that tense conversation at the restaurant, there was a fragile, unspoken agreement between him and Olivia. She would allow him to help, but the walls she had built around her heart were not coming down easily. Liam understood. He knew that actions would speak louder than words, and he was determined to show her that he wasn't the same man who had failed her so many times before. He threw himself into his work. But his mind was always partially on Olivia, on the baby. He sent small, thoughtful gifts to her apartment, baby supplies, and personal notes of encouragement. Each time she received one, he would get a text, usually brief, sometimes just an acknowledgement like, "Thanks, Liam," or "I don't need this, but I'll take it." It wasn't much, but it was progress. Olivia wasn't pushing him away as much as she had before, and that gave him hope. Then, one evening, he got the call. It was Rachel, Olivia's closest friend. She had been a silent witness to the turmoil of Olivia's life, and over the past weeks, Liam had found himself relying on Rachel more than he had ever expected. "Liam, it's time," Rachel said, her voice shaking with excitement, but also apprehension. "Olivia's water broke. She's in labor. You should come now, before it's too late." Liam's heart skipped a beat. He had known this moment was coming, but it still hit him with the force of a freight train. This was it. The moment he could prove to Olivia that he was ready to be there for her, ready to be there for their son. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he replied, his voice steady but urgent. The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. What would the baby be like? Would he be a boy with Olivia's warm eyes, or would he have Liam's sharp jawline? Would Olivia allow him to be part of this moment, or would she shut him out like she had done so many times before? When Liam finally arrived at the hospital, the bright, sterile hallways only made his anxiety feel worse. Rachel was waiting for him in the waiting room, her face pale and tense. She had been there for Olivia through every tough moment, and now she was here, standing beside him, unsure of what would happen next. "He's coming soon, Liam. I've never seen Olivia like this," Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. "She's scared, but she's also strong. She's been through a lot, and now she's giving birth to a piece of you too." Liam nodded, his throat tight. "I don't know what's going to happen, Rachel, but I have to be there for her. I have to be there for him." Before Rachel could say anything more, a nurse came rushing through the door. "You're Mr. Knight, right? Olivia's her partner?" The nurse asked quickly. Liam's chest tightened at the question. They weren't partners, not in the traditional sense, but the nurse didn't need to know the details. He nodded quickly. "I'm here for her. Where is she?" The nurse led him down the hallway, past doors marked with signs of medical importance, until they reached a room at the end. He could hear Olivia's voice from inside, strained but steady. She was in the midst of a contraction, but the sound of her voice, despite the pain, soothed him. She was still fighting, still strong. Liam stepped into the room, and for the first time, he saw Olivia in a different light. She was lying in the bed, sweat beading on her forehead, her breathing shallow but controlled. Her pregnancy was no longer just a visible condition. It had become the life-altering event that had brought them both to this very moment. He felt a rush of guilt, of regret. He had missed so much. But now, he had the chance to be there. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The fierce, unspoken emotions between them swirled, but they both knew this was not the time for words. Olivia's face was tired, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "You came?" she said, her voice rough from the exertion of labor. Liam stepped closer, his heart in his throat. "Of course I came. I'm not going anywhere." A weak smile tugged at the corners of Olivia's mouth, but the contraction hit her again, and she clenched her jaw, her hands gripping the bed rails. Liam stood at her side, unsure of what to do, but determined to be there, to stay by her side no matter what. "Just breathe, Olivia. You're doing great," he said softly, though his own nerves were rattling inside him. He wasn't sure how to help, but he would learn, one way or another. She nodded briefly, closing her eyes as the contraction passed. Rachel had stepped back to give them space, but she remained nearby, watching the process unfold. Liam stood close, doing his best to support Olivia, but he could see how much pain she was in. His heart broke for her, for the years of hurt and hardship she had endured alone. An hour later, the room was filled with the sounds of life. The cries of a newborn baby echoed through the sterile space, and Olivia's exhausted but relieved expression was the first thing Liam saw when he looked at her. "It's a boy," the doctor said, his voice filled with warmth and pride. "Congratulations!" Liam felt a lump form in his throat as he looked down at Olivia. She had just given him the greatest gift, the gift of a new life, a new chance. He had no idea what the future held, but in that moment, all that mattered was that they had a future together. The nurse brought the baby over to Olivia, and Liam's heart nearly stopped. He was tiny, his skin wrinkled and pink from the birthing process, but there was something beautiful about him, something so real, so perfect. Olivia cradled their son in her arms, and Liam stood there, a man on the edge of a new beginning. He stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I hold him?" Olivia nodded slowly, her eyes still filled with tenderness, but there was a flicker of hesitation in them. "If you're sure," she said quietly, her voice betraying the vulnerability she had been guarding for so long. Liam took the tiny bundle in his arms, his hands shaking slightly as he held his son for the first time. The warmth of the baby's body against his chest was enough to make his heart overflow with emotion. He had missed so much, but now he had a chance to make it right. He could be the father this child deserved. He could be the man that Olivia deserved. "I promise, little one," he whispered to the baby, his voice thick with emotion, "I'll be the father you need. I'll be here for you, for both of you." Olivia watched them, her expression unreadable, but in her eyes, there was something different now. Something softer, something that had been buried for so long. And in that moment, Liam knew that this was only the beginning of the journey ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he truly believed that he could change. And with that baby in his arms, he was ready to begin. The days that followed the birth of his son felt like a whirlwind. Liam was engulfed in the euphoria of fatherhood, but underneath it all, there was a weight of reality that he couldn't escape. He had made promises, to Olivia, to their child, and to himself. But promises alone weren't enough. He would have to prove himself day by day, action by action. It wasn't just about being a good father. It was about being a man Olivia could trust again. For the first time in his life, Liam felt the full force of responsibility. His heart was no longer just his own. It belonged to Olivia and their son. Every time he looked at the little boy in his arms, he was reminded of the mistakes he had made. But more importantly, he was reminded of the opportunity to make things right. He wasn't just trying to be a better man for Olivia. He was trying to be the man his son would look up to, the one who would guide him through life's challenges. At night, after the baby had fallen asleep, Liam and Olivia would sit together in the quiet of their apartment. There were no grand romantic gestures, no passionate declarations of love. Instead, there were long, meaningful silences, punctuated by the soft cooing of the baby and the occasional exchange of words. "I'm not sure I can do this," Olivia admitted one night, her voice low and uncertain. The vulnerability in her words struck Liam hard. You don't have to do it alone, he said, his voice firm, though it trembled slightly with the weight of what he was offering. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. I'm here. I'll always be here. For you. For him. Olivia looked at him, her gaze softening. There was a sadness in her eyes, a lingering fear that he couldn't quite shake. But there was also something else. Hope. A tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, he could keep his promise this time. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, Liam began to settle into his new role. He had restructured his work schedule so that he could spend more time at home. And though it wasn't easy, he was more than willing to make the sacrifices. He learned how to change diapers, how to soothe a crying baby, how to listen when Olivia needed to vent or cry herself. He learned that love wasn't just about grand gestures. It was in the little things, in the moments where he showed up day after day, no matter how hard it was. Olivia, for her part, had softened. She still kept her distance, still guarded her heart, but Liam could feel the change. There were moments when she would allow herself to lean on him, when she would rest her head on his shoulder, or when they would share a quiet moment in the kitchen as he prepared dinner, each of them silently aware of the unspoken bond that was growing between them. Rachel, too, noticed the change. She had been Olivia's rock throughout the years, but now she saw the walls that had once stood between Olivia and Liam beginning to crumble, slowly but steadily. I see the way you look at him, Rachel said one afternoon as they sat together in Olivia's living room. The baby was asleep in his crib, and they were sipping tea, enjoying a rare moment of peace. You're both trying. You're trying for him. And that's the most important thing. Olivia sighed deeply, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her cup. I'm scared, Rachel. What if I'm making a mistake? What if I let him back in, and he hurts us again? Rachel gave her a knowing look, her gaze steady and filled with understanding. The past doesn't define you, Olivia. It's what you do now that matters. If you see the change in him, if you feel it, you have to trust that. And if you can't trust him completely yet, that's okay. You don't have to rush, but you have to let yourself believe that people can change. You've seen it with your own eyes. Olivia hesitated, her mind caught between the fear of the past and the hope for the future. I don't know if I'm ready. Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a gentle squeeze. No one's ever really ready. But sometimes you just have to take the first step. Olivia nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision before her. She knew that if she allowed Liam back into her life, it would mean opening herself up to the possibility of pain again. But she also knew that closing herself off forever wouldn't bring her the peace she needed. She couldn't keep carrying the weight of the past forever. Meanwhile, Liam's journey towards self-improvement continued. He wasn't just working on being a better father. He was working on becoming a better man, a man who could be trusted. He continued his therapy, confronting his past with a brutal honesty that made him uncomfortable but was necessary for his growth. He took responsibility for his actions, no longer hiding behind the arrogance that had once defined him. At work, his leadership began to shift. He made decisions based on empathy and understanding, prioritizing his employees' well-being and personal growth over mere profit. He began to lead not just with authority, but with humility. His team noticed the change, and while some were skeptical at first, most saw the sincerity in his actions and admired the man he was becoming. One evening, as he sat in his office late, working on a project, he received a message from Olivia. It was short, but it meant the world to him. I think I'm ready. Let's talk. His heart raced as he read the words. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was a crack in the wall that had kept them apart for so long. She was willing to talk, to see him, to let him in. He set down his work and immediately sent a reply. I'll be there. Whenever you're ready. The next day, they sat down together in the same quiet room where they had shared so many difficult conversations before. Olivia looked different now, more at ease, but there was still a wariness in her eyes. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, she began, her voice steady but vulnerable. But I see the change in you, Liam. I see how hard you're trying. Liam leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. I don't expect you to trust me overnight. I don't deserve that. But I'm here, Olivia. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not the man I was before, and I'll spend the rest of my life showing you that. Olivia's lips trembled, but she held his gaze. I want to believe you. I really do. Liam reached for her hand, holding it gently in his. I know, and I'll prove it to you, every single day. In that moment, something shifted. The walls between them weren't fully gone, but they were no longer insurmountable. There was still much work to be done. But for the first time in a long time, they both felt that the journey they were on wasn't just about healing the past. It was about building a future, together. And with that, they took their first step forward. The weeks that followed their conversation marked a pivotal turning point in Liam and Olivia's relationship. They didn't rush back into old habits or pick up where they had left off. There was no grand gesture, no sudden wave of love that swept them off their feet. Instead, they began to rebuild, piece by piece, learning to trust the fragile bridge they were constructing together. For Liam, this period was one of intense self-reflection and growth. He found himself more present in his son's life than ever before, attending every small milestone, no matter how insignificant it seemed to the outside world. He marveled at the way his son's eyes would light up when he smiled, or when Olivia whispered to him in the soft, melodious voice only a mother could possess. Liam realized that becoming a father was the most profound transformation of all. It wasn't just about proving he could be better for Olivia. It was about proving to himself that he could be the man his son would one day look up to. He took his role seriously. He woke up early, helped Olivia with the baby, made breakfast, and then went to his office, not as the CEO who commanded the boardroom, but as a father who had responsibilities far beyond the world of tech and finance. His therapy continued, and with every session, he uncovered new layers of his own insecurities, fears, and the deep-rooted pride that had shaped so many of his past decisions. He acknowledged the mistakes he'd made, especially the ones that had cost him his marriage. But he knew that the road to redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making the right choices from that moment forward. At work, the changes Liam had begun to implement slowly but surely took root. His approach to leadership had evolved, focusing more on empathy and fostering a sense of trust among his employees. He was no longer the cutthroat CEO who pushed people to their limits for the sake of profit. Instead, he cultivated a culture of respect, openness, and collaboration. His employees noticed the shift and responded positively, some even citing him as an inspiration. The company, which had once been driven solely by ambition and competition, now thrived on a deeper sense of purpose. As the months passed, Olivia's walls began to come down, but slowly. She wasn't ready to fully trust Liam again, but she was beginning to see the man he was becoming. And, perhaps more importantly, she was beginning to allow herself the possibility of a future where they could be a family. She had learned to keep her guard up, but now, when she looked at Liam, there was something else in her eyes, an unspoken recognition that change was possible. One evening, as they sat together after putting their son to bed, Olivia spoke. I can see it, Liam, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I see the difference in you. I see how much you've changed. But it's hard. I'm scared. Liam reached for her hand, his heart in his chest. He understood. He knew how much trust he had to rebuild. He had once broken her in a way that could never be undone, and it would take time to heal those wounds. I'm scared too, Olivia, he admitted, but I'm not going to let fear drive me. I'm here, and I'll keep showing up, no matter what. I want to prove to you that I'm the man you can rely on. Olivia looked at him, searching his face for the sincerity she needed to see. She found it. It wasn't perfect. No one was, but it was real. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe, like there was hope for them after all. That night, they talked late into the evening. They spoke of everything and nothing, their past, their present, and the tentative future they were beginning to imagine. They shared their fears and hopes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they shared a quiet understanding, a sense that they were no longer fighting alone. They were fighting together, as a family. Days turned into weeks, and their relationship continued to evolve. Liam's actions spoke louder than any words could. He showed up for Olivia in ways he never had before. Whether it was making dinner after a long day, offering to take the night shift with the baby so she could sleep, or simply listening when she needed to vent, he was there. There were no more excuses, no more pride standing in the way of his love for her. Olivia, in turn, began to open up more. She wasn't ready to fully reconcile yet, but she allowed herself to be vulnerable with him in small ways. She would rest her head on his shoulder while they watched TV, or give him a small, affectionate smile when he did something particularly thoughtful. These were simple moments, but to Liam, they meant everything. It was a sign that trust was slowly being restored, that the wall between them was slowly crumbling. One afternoon, as Liam sat at his desk in his office, he received an unexpected phone call from Olivia. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't know if we're ready for this yet, but I think we should try. We should try again. For us. For him." Liam felt his heart leap in his chest. It wasn't a declaration of full commitment, but it was something far more precious, a recognition that there was a possibility, a glimmer of hope for their future. "I don't know what the future holds, Olivia," he said, his voice low and full of sincerity. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I will spend every day showing you that I'm the man you deserve." The next few days were a blur. They spent more time together, talking about the practicalities of their life, discussing their hopes for the future, and navigating the delicate dance of rebuilding what had once been lost. They didn't rush. There was no rush to make things perfect overnight. They were learning to walk again, side by side, as parents, as partners, as equals. Liam also took another step in his journey toward reconciliation. He had always been a proud man, and that pride had been the very thing that had destroyed his marriage. Now he understood that to fully redeem himself, he had to make amends, not just with Olivia, but with those he had wronged in the past. So he reached out to his employees, to the people he had once disregarded in his pursuit of success, and apologized. He acknowledged his past mistakes, his arrogance, and the way he had neglected the very people who had helped build his company. Some were skeptical. Some didn't believe him. But over time, as his actions spoke louder than his words, people began to see the sincerity in his transformation. It wasn't just about making amends for the sake of redemption. It was about changing the very core of who he was. One evening, after another long day of work, Liam came home to find Olivia waiting for him on the couch, their son asleep in the crib. She smiled when she saw him, a quiet smile that spoke volumes. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice soft but full of meaning. Liam sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "For what?" "For showing up," she replied. "For proving that people can change. For showing me that I can believe in you again." Liam squeezed her hand, his heart full. "I'll keep showing up, Olivia. I'll keep proving it every single day." And in that moment, they both knew that they weren't just rebuilding their relationship. They were creating something entirely new. Something built on trust, love, and a shared understanding that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Liam stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. His reflection stared back at him, no longer the arrogant, self-centered man he once was, but a man who had learned the hard way what true redemption meant. His heart raced, not out of nervousness for the ceremony, but because today was the culmination of years of mistakes, growth, and a newfound sense of purpose. It was the day that, in a way, defined everything he had worked toward. The wedding venue was intimate, a quiet garden tucked away in a corner of the city, far from the hustle and bustle of his usual life. It was a stark contrast to the grand, lavish events Liam was accustomed to, and yet, in its simplicity, it felt right. The flowers were fresh and delicate, the air crisp with the scent of spring. The sun had begun to set, casting a soft, golden light across the space. It was as though the world itself was giving them the space to breathe, to forgive, and to start anew. As Liam walked toward the altar, his thoughts lingered on the long, difficult road that had brought him here. He thought of the countless hours spent in therapy, the difficult conversations with Olivia, and the slow but steady rebuilding of trust. He had once taken everything for granted, his career, his wealth, and even Olivia's love. But now, none of those things mattered unless they were shared with the woman standing beside him, the woman who had stood strong for so long, even when he had faltered. He reached the front of the ceremony, where his closest friends and family had gathered, each face marked with smiles and quiet anticipation. Rachel, who had been a constant source of support for Olivia, stood by her side, her eyes filled with both pride and warmth. Liam's heart swelled with gratitude for her presence, knowing that she had been a silent pillar holding Olivia up when Liam had failed to do so. And then there was Olivia. Standing in front of him, radiating with quiet strength and grace, her eyes locked on his. She had come a long way, and so had he. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, a perfect reflection of the woman she had become, the woman who was no longer afraid to open her heart again. As she walked down the aisle toward him, the sound of soft music filling the air, every step felt like a promise that despite everything, despite all the pain and uncertainty, they were here, together, ready to move forward. Their son, now toddling along with the help of a family member, looked up at them with wide eyes, as though trying to understand what was happening. To him, this was just another moment in a life that was being shaped by the love and care of the two people who had created him. But to Liam and Olivia, it was everything. As she reached the altar, Olivia took a deep breath, her gaze never wavering from Liam's. They stood there, surrounded by people who had witnessed their struggle and their growth. The minister, a kind older woman who had seen couples through their own trials, began the ceremony, speaking softly about love, forgiveness, and second chances. But as Liam looked at Olivia, he found that he didn't need to hear the words. He knew what was in his heart. His love for her was no longer clouded by pride or selfishness. It was pure, steady, and unwavering. He reached for her hand, and in that simple touch, everything they had been through was acknowledged. The pain, the distance, the healing, and now, the promise of a new beginning. I stand before you today, not as the man I was before, Liam began, his voice thick with emotion, but as the man I've become because of you. I will never again take for granted the love you've given me. I will never again let my pride get in the way of what's truly important. You've shown me what it means to love without conditions, and I am so deeply grateful for your forgiveness and your strength. Olivia's eyes welled with tears, but she smiled. I didn't think I could forgive you, Liam, she replied, her voice steady. But you showed me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing to move forward, together. You've changed in ways I didn't think were possible, and for that, I'm grateful. For us, for our son, and for the family we're building. Liam nodded, feeling a wave of emotion flood through him. Every word she spoke resonated deeply with him. This wasn't just a vow. It was a promise, one that was earned through the very actions that had led them to this moment. I vow to never again be the man who failed you, Liam continued, his voice steady now. I will be the man you need, the father our son deserves, and the partner you can rely on. No matter what comes, I will stand by you, always. And as Olivia spoke her own vows, Liam felt something deep within him shift. The years of doubt, guilt, and uncertainty that had once clouded their relationship seemed to melt away, replaced by something stronger. Something that wasn't just based on love, but on understanding, respect, and a shared desire for a future built on trust and compassion. When the ceremony concluded and the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the air was filled with applause and cheers. But for Liam and Olivia, the true significance of that moment wasn't in the celebration. It was in the quiet understanding that they had reached the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. A chapter that was theirs to write with every word, every decision, and every day spent together. Later that evening, at their reception, surrounded by friends and family, Liam couldn't help but feel the weight of everything they had overcome. His company had reached new heights, his role as a father had deepened in ways he never imagined, and his relationship with Olivia had grown stronger than he thought possible. As they danced together, their son in the arms of a relative nearby, Liam whispered to Olivia, This is everything I've ever wanted. Not the wealth, not the success, just this, us. Olivia smiled softly, resting her head on his chest. I used to think we were broken beyond repair, but now I know that even the broken pieces can fit together. It just takes time. The night was filled with laughter, music, and a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. As Liam looked around at the people who had supported them, who had witnessed their journey, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. His transformation had come at a cost, but it had been worth it. He had earned the love and trust of the woman he loved, and together they would build a future full of hope. When the evening came to a close and the guests had all left, Liam and Olivia stood outside, their hands entwined. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as though they too were bearing witness to the full circle of their love. "I love you," Liam said softly, his voice filled with conviction. Olivia smiled, her heart full. "I love you too." And for the first time, the future didn't seem uncertain. It seemed like a beautiful promise, a promise they would keep together. The story of Liam and Olivia is not a perfect one, but it is through the cracks and missteps that their love found its completeness. It was a long journey, filled with mistakes, unhealed wounds, but also a journey of learning, forgiveness, and growth. They were once two strangers, two hearts that had lost each other in the stormy sea of love. But over time, they learned how to love again. This time with sincerity, with real actions, and with respect for one another. For Liam, life was no longer about numbers, contracts, or tense meetings. He had found true meaning in love, in fatherhood, and in being a dedicated partner. He understood that all the success in the world meant nothing without the one he loved by his side. And Olivia, the strong woman who had once borne the pain of betrayal, was finally able to open her heart again, allowing herself to love and be loved. Together, they had overcome challenges, not just to rebuild their love, but to create a family, a home filled with laughter and happiness. With their son, they knew this was the beginning of a new chapter, one no longer shadowed by past sorrows, but full of hope and dreams for the future. This story is a testament to the power of change, forgiveness, and true love. It reminds us that no one is perfect, but with sincerity and relentless effort, anything can change. And sometimes, true love is not about finding the perfect person, but finding someone with whom you can build a new life, not with empty promises, but with actions and an honest heart. Liam and Olivia proved that, no matter how harsh life may be, if we don't give up and keep pushing forward, we will eventually find our way, a path of love, forgiveness, and rebirth. Their story is not just a lesson in love, but a reminder of the power of renewal and the ability to overcome any challenge to create a future worthy of what we have endured. And as they watched their little boy grow in the embrace of love, they knew their journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Liam and Olivia's story. We hope it touched your heart and reminded you of the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances. It's been a journey of growth and redemption, and we're so grateful to have shared it with you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear from you. Your support means the world to us. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more heartwarming stories and content like this. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know when we post new videos, so you never miss out on an uplifting story. Thank you again for being part of our community, and we look forward to bringing you more stories that inspire and resonate. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing in the power of love.